一个北美华裔女孩偷偷录下父母看春晚机器人节目，画面里机器人行云流水，拳脚带风。画面外她的父母当场破防，假的，不可能，马斯克都做不到，他们怎么可能做到？听到这话，我差点笑出声。这不是在质疑技术这是在守护信仰。在他们的宇宙里科技只有一个坐标系，凡是先进的一定在美国，凡是来自中国的一定有猫腻。这不是技术判断，这是认知惯性。庄子说井蛙不可语于海，不是海不存在，是井口太小。更讽刺的是什么？当年他们移民的时候中国还在用拨号上网，手机是诺基亚，电动车是笑话，机器人那是终结者的幻想。可世界这东西从来就不等人。中国电动车销量飙升，无人机领域 DJI 几乎一统江湖，人形机器人波士顿 Upsdown 跳个舞都要摆拍100遍减10000遍。而春晚那种直播级别的群舞编排，在亿万双眼睛的盯着的环境下，零失误输出，这不叫 PPT 科技这叫工业级稳定性。结果呢，他们不信，因为一旦承认是真的，就等于自己给自己来了一个硬硬的逼斗，就等于承认世界已经不是他们当年离开时的那个世界。这其实是一种很有趣的心理防御机制。如果中国永远落后，那我当年选择移民就永远正确。如果中国开始领先，那我这几十年的优越感该怎么办？于是只能用一句话堵住现实：假的。你看多省事儿。当现实打脸的时候最简单的办法不是更新认知，而是封闭感知，学三哥跟董王的银学。更耐人寻味的是他们举的例子马斯克都做不到，这句话暴露了一个底层逻辑：科技必须有一个神底，如果神没宣布，人间不许进步。可技术演进从来不是单线程的。当年欧洲人还在争论蒸汽机是不是骗局，工业革命已经滚滚向前。当年有人嘲笑电动车续航像玩具，今天满大街都是新能源。历史从不等待情绪消化。真正有趣的是润二代的反应，在海外长大的孩子反而看得更淡定，他们不需要通过贬低故乡来证明自己，他们站在更开阔的环境里，反而更容易承认事实。有时候离得越远，看得越清，旁观者清。你会发现一个规律当对手开始质疑真假，说明你已经突破他们认知的上限。如果动作僵硬、卡顿，像铁皮罐头，没人会怀疑是特效。正因为太丝滑，才让人怀疑人生。这就像考试你考60分，没人质疑；你突然考100分，大家第一反应是抄的吧？更大的讽刺在未来。现在他们说舞台作秀，再过10年，当机器人进工厂、进养老院、进家庭，当标着 Made in China 的产品像当年的无人机一样遍地开花，那个时候再说假，就有点像对着太阳说天黑了。其实我觉得这种破防挺可耐，说明世界正在加速，说明认知差正在缩短，说明旧的叙事正在崩塌。历史的车轮碾压过的时候总有人捂着耳朵说听不见。但问题是听不见不代表它不存在。最后一句话送给那对父母：技术进步不需要谁批准，现实也不需要谁点头。世界不是静止的，它一直在更新版本。如果你还停留在几十年前的系统，那不是世界卡顿，那是你没升级。而升级这件事从来不分国籍。
Very interesting. Other analysts have pointed out that, potentially the fact that you can do a pre-programmed display in a very controlled environment on a stage doesn't necessarily prove that these are already sort of capable of being useful when you're in a factory or when you're in a home. You can't be pre-programmed. You want to be sort of acting and reacting to things as they happen. You might not have always a completely flat floor like a stage. So it's not there yet. But I mean, it's much further ahead than anyone else. And compared to sort of the images we saw of sort of robotics about 5 years ago, it's incredible.
I mean, that's cope. If you don't think this stuff is coming, and certainly I think for jobs in the next 20 years, I think that's probably a conservative estimate, that's cope. For people watching or listening, type into YouTube Atlas Robot 2008. And then look at that. Even something like a battery, lithium batteries were so inferior back then that it actually had to be plugged into the mains. So the idea of a standalone autonomous robot, just having the power supply to do this stuff, wasn't doable less than 20 years ago. It's a huge sort of marquee technology for China. 100%. I also think that, Michael, in this conversation, we're talking about China versus the United States. Where's Europe? This is a really key question, I think, for the rest of my life, your life, certainly for the next 50 years, hope we live that long, is that Europe is just nowhere in terms of these technologies. I wrote Fully Automated Luxury Communism in 2018. It was published then. And I talked about synthetic biology. I talk about renewable energy. I talk about autonomous machines. It's all happening. But I got one key thing wrong. I understated my case. It's happening far more quickly than I realized. Whether that's EVs being produced by China, the fact that BYD, China's leading EV car manufacturer, their sales in the UK in the last 12 months went up by 880%. People love these vehicles because they're cheap, right? Look at a Chinese SUV EV, compare it to a Range Rover Evoque, see how much cheaper it is, see how much cheaper it is to run. It's a much better product. Now, 10 to 15 years ago, the idea of an EV being a mass consumer product in the UK was outlandish. My view, and maybe, famous last words, general purpose robotics, which resemble humanoids, will be the same. I think it's going to be a relatively commonplace feature of our societies in about 15 years. They won't be everywhere, just like EVs aren't everywhere. And that takes a really long time in terms of diffusion and adoption. But you'll see them. They'll be around. And that point about, yes, very impressive, but it's all choreographed and it's all programmed. It's not responding to real-time stimuli. That's true, and that's a lot of computation to do that. But one of the problems with humanoid robots is an inability to mimic fine motor coordination, which, if you watch that video, guess what? They nailed it. So this is clearly a moment where we should be taking stock about what this means for our economic model. What should it mean for jobs? A great line I saw recently: any job created in the 20th century is going to disappear in the 21st, partly a function of machine learning and LLMs and AI. I think when I see videos like that, I would go a lot further back.
One of the things I like about, looking into AI and the development of it, and then also these humanoid robots, is it changes your perspective of what's like remarkable about humans. So it's always, in old debates about sort of, did we evolve or were we created by God? The argument for intelligent design was always that the eye is so complex, it couldn't possibly have sort of come about by accident. It must be a God that created it. But we kind of sorted vision really quickly. The thing we still can't sort is the hand, right? So it's the hand seems to be the part of the human body which is hardest to replicate. We can do intelligence, we can do vision, we can do voice recognition, but we're still really struggling to pick stuff up.
The brain as well. I mean, again,
the brain's good, yeah.
It's not a like for like. It's not a like for like kind of comparison, but this idea that having an AI that can approximate the human brain in terms of its synapses, that's again maybe 10, 15 years away. Does that mean you can replicate consciousness? No. Does it mean it's sentient?
You might be able to. Who knows?
You might be able to, but that's not the claim.
I'm not confident either way.
But something that's capable of the same levels of computation. I mean, that's happening. And then people say, well, not everything's information. Kind of is. You can encode information as DNA. So you can get, all the songs you listen to on Spotify, that can be as encoded as DNA and saved as DNA and then re-encoded back to the digital information, and you can listen back to the music again. So kind of is. But look, this is the stuff that the left should be taking super seriously. Michael, I don't know if you saw this story last week. It's partly a Hail Mary commercial kind of provocation from Elon Musk. He's saying, let's have servers in space. Because, of course, in space, they'll be cooler. You won't have lobby groups trying to stop you, but also it's better for the environment, which is true. And you'll have abundant solar energy available because they're in space. I mean, that sounds kind of good. That sounds kind of cool. The point is, who benefits from these technologies? Right now, Elon Musk is worth $750 billion US. We've seen what big tech, we've seen what social media has done to inequality over the last 20 years. My concern is what LLMs, AI, machine learning, and humanoid robots will do to inequality over the next 20 years. I fear, with our present economic model, with our present stories, with our present presumptions, it will be much worse. I don't want that to happen, which is why we have to have a politics in response.
So I suppose to go back to our previous story about, I suppose, the arrogance of some of the Silicon Valley bosses, where they think they can get to decide how their technology is used, is there not a similar argument that can be made when you say that the question is who benefits, right? Because it might be that there are certain technologies where once you create them, the idea that we can control how they're used sort of suggests a certain arrogance as well. And I suppose in terms of Europe being...
Give me an example.
In terms of Europe being behind, right? So...
Well, these are two separate things, Michael. Come on, one at a time.
No, but because they're connected, right? Because
Go on.
In terms of Europe being behind, you're sort of saying we need to catch up with China on X, Y, Z. Now, I think on high-speed rail, yes, unambiguously brilliant.
Yeah.
FT article this week, sort of just the extent to which the Chinese built out high-speed rail just dwarfs anything in Europe. We should have done that. There's no reason we can't do that. It's not like we don't have the technology. We just don't have the political will. Should have done that. EVs, we could have done that. I mean, obviously, in terms of skill and state capacity, probably not, but I would have backed us doing that, let's say.
5G, definitely.
In terms of 5G as well. In terms of this army of robots, in the same way that I'm very skeptical that we're going to be able to control sort of frontier AI models and make sure that it's only used for good. China also, of course, ahead when it comes to drone swarms. I'm not sure the idea that Europe should have been sort of more effective when it came to the race to build autonomous humanoid robots and drones. I'm just like, maybe staying out of it and trying to regulate the tech was the best option all along.
So on this technology only being for good, I'm not saying that, and no technology is only for good. The point is about regulation, and like I say, who benefits from it? I mean, a great example about regulation is cars. Nobody says that cars today are only for good. About 30,000 people, I think, in the United States every year die from car accidents. I still think, generally speaking, people think there is a lot of positive utility that's created by cars. I would like fewer of them on the roads, right? And I'd like more public transport, but I think even if you had a complete like anti-car politics, you would say that older people and people with, lots of kids should be able to access cars, right? So I don't think any technology is just for good. The point is, we have to determine the rules, conventions, applications of any technology. If you decide not to do that, you end up in a place where and it's because we had a free market ideology at the twilight of the 20th century, start of the 21st century, which is that the market always decides, don't worry about it, we don't need to have a political conversation around this stuff. Great book on this, Technopoly by Neil Postman. He says our society, really after the 1980s, 1990s, is the first society in human history where people actually think you don't need to have a view on application of technology. It's a very new mindset. He calls it a technopoly. You move from a tool-making society to technocracy to technopoly, where people use tools. Finally, the tools use the people. And I think that is ultimately actually a very important thing. On Europe, no, Europe probably can't make humanoid robots. Should Europe be making more of its own microprocessors in terms of a technology sovereignty argument? 100%. Should Europe be making more of its own photovoltaic cells? 100%. Should it be making at least parts of EV production going forward? 100%. Our relationship to China, to me, is the big story here. And it's not a popular claim. Ultimately, Europe needs to work out where it belongs. I think Europe is part of a greater Eurasian civilization, right? Personally. But I know lots of Brits think that actually Europe is part of the Anglophone world and has nothing to do with France, let alone bloody China. So that's part of a broader conversation. I do think China should be involved in helping us build 5G and high-speed rail. These are two critical failures in this country over the last 25 years. We are very bad at building infrastructure, nuclear power too. There's a country that's very good at building it, but our political class has decided we don't want anything to do with them because apparently, we're some peer rival to China. If you believe that in 2026, you'll believe anything.